what do you think about starting this podcast by telling people what they can do at home
Sure.
to, if they're in this type of situation or they feel they're being accosted or
Yeah.
under some kind of energetic duress?
Yep. Sure. That's fine.
I mean, I just, just as a
General giving back.
well, I mean,
Pay it forward.
if you want to go into it or if you want to.
Well, it's nothing that I'm trying to hold back on. I mean, there's that like the Sadhguru thing, it's like everybody wants to do everything, but when it comes time to actually doing it, you know, 2% do it, and 2% of them do it well. So, that's not our rules. It's just that's the way it is. So, um, you can't do it once and expect that it's going to eradicate things. This is something that's ongoing. But, again, if you're under mental duress, then, you know, you'll
I mean, I think it's
you'll
a
do it.
yeah, okay. I mean, I think it would be a good topic because probably a lot of people feel like they're under mental duress or under some
Sure,
kind of
sure. From
energetic
all kinds of things.
attack
Yeah.
all the time from
Yeah.
everything. Not to laugh at that, but more just um
Yeah. The thing is like,
because it's I mean and literally like I'm not laughing at that. I'm literally laughing at the perceived truth of that, in a way that it would be very natural to frame normal life with all the distractions that we have and things like that as being a kind of energetic attack that we have to deal with all the time.
sure, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a correlation there. And
So,
just like your immune system, if it's overwhelmed, then a cold can kill you, right? So, you know, that's why, you know, our biggest thing is do this work, get better at, get good at it before you need it. So,
but that's kind of antithetical to the that I mean, not that that's not a good perspective, but don't you think that that's in some ways antithetical to what brings people to this work to begin with almost all the time?
what do
Like
you mean?
people, well, you always say like people never come to this work for like great reasons or pure intentions or like whatever. They have things that they want to change in their life or they're already under some kind of duress or pain or suffering or lack or want or
Yeah.
whatever. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like how many people can say that they're like, oh, I'm going to come to this work and build myself up. So when bad shit's happening to me, I'm already in a great place and I can take on whatever challenge is going on at the time. It's like most of the time you're coming to it and you're already feeling like you're behind the eight ball energetically or mentally or physically or emotionally or whatever.
Right. Well, it's, I would say, um, in that case, it's two different types of people, the people that have had a negative experience,
With what?
anything, energetically or, like, it's like, again, it gets, we're starting to split things, right? It's like the people that we're approaching with our programs are, the people that have tried the force versus force, right? It's like, they've kept their nose to the grindstone. They've done everything physically. They're playing the physical game, trying to get ahead. It's not working, or they're just barely, breaking the surface of the water. So, and they seem to be stuck in that territory. for whatever reason. So you need a new perspective, right? Because you only have so much energy to push harder through that. You only have so much force. And obviously, the force of the world um, is going to be stronger than your individual force.
To try and make something happen in your life
Yeah. I
or
mean,
try and
at
change things
least
for
from
the
a
better.
physical standpoint, right?
Yeah.
It's like, so, um, so if that's the case, let's say they've already kind of gotten their nose bloodied, you know, to some degree. They haven't been decimated, but they've been, you know, they've gotten knocked down a couple times. And so now they're looking at it from a different outside the box, right? This is a different perspective. So it's like, what if I build up that source energy and then it moves through me in a directed way to overcome that scenario? Is that a possibility? Well, yeah, it is. So, the physical analogy would be, the person that gets accosted, tries to defend themselves and gets knocked on the ground and their shit stolen, right? It's like, and then they don't think it's a fluke. They take it under their own responsibility to build themselves up in a way that there's less likelihood that that will happen again. And that could be anything from reevaluating, where they are and what they're doing, to going and get some training, whether it's in boxing or jujitsu or kung fu or whatever, right? Some kind of martial trade. And knowing that will take years to really get to a point where, if anything were to happen again, that they would have a better chance at it. Not that they're looking to avenge themselves or anything like that. It's just literally like for their own state of mental well-being, to feel like they're not in fear all the time of that happening repeatedly, right? So they're forward thinking, right? There's always going to be some people that before they get their nose bloodied, they take on that, they have that idea and they take on that training. So they'll be at least prepared, right? As much as you can be. Anybody can be taken down. Doesn't matter, right? Doesn't matter how good you are. But your chances increase of getting away, with less, if you have some understanding and training. I mean, that's just logic, right? I mean, we know that to be the case. So, the other people, they want, and I've met people like this, they come into the, training area and, last week they got accosted and they want to learn something that in 2 weeks they can go back and try to break somebody else's nose. And it's like, that's a fool's errand, right? That's just fantasy, right? And so, it's also a fantasy to think you're going to develop a single, punch, kind of like Dragon Ball Z, where you just have one technique and it just decimates the other person no matter what happens to you. That's fantasy too, right? That's the reason you have systems. There's lots that supports that, right? It's not like you can just learn one thing and that's the end of it, right? That's a bad kung fu movie, right? So it's like, I have the death touch, and so, it's yeah, okay. Not gonna work. um so it's like I think we have to give people, I mean, it's, when I say it, people should be chuckling because it should be, that should be logic, understanding on a basic level, but for most people it's not. And so, or it's not being articulated in that way. So the same stuff, as above, so below, right? It's like the energetic is no different than the physical. It's like it takes time and effort to feel through it, right? To be able to build up certain skill aspects, right? So, the burning meditation is a great place to start because it will eradicate, to some extent, layer by layer of stress and mental fatigue that you've acquired. What does that do? Not only does it make you physically feel better, um, that feeling better because of the lack of stress makes you respond in the world in a better way, right? You're not as clouded by being overwhelmed with everything. Uh, you know, you no longer, it's not the straw that breaks the camel's back anymore. Now it's the bales of hay that, potentially could break your back. But your capacity is much more great to be able to um, understand that as it's building up and know how to extricate yourself from that if you keep up with the practice, right? That's why it's the base practice for at least the tradition that I learned from. Was like it was the only meditation that was required. I mean, there are vast numbers of meditations, right? But burning was the only one required for you to be there because it was that important. It's a basis for everything else. So if you don't have that clarity, that reduction in stress and mental fatigue, your longevity is cut down, because how long can you sustain that, stress and mental fatigue, you know, um, and you know, uh, the other thing is that again, it does move into the physical. If you're constantly overwhelmed with stress and fatigue, how are you going to be able to understand anything more advanced than that, right? Or a little bit more nuanced than that, right? You need to have that done. Um, it's an ongoing process that will enhance everything else that you try, right? So yeah, that's I think that's what I would say about that. So uh, so for those people who are you know more forward thinking, they're going to start this before they have that true um, physical expression of stress and mental fatigue to a debilitating degree, right? For others, they'll feel that weightiness of that stress and mental fatigue and that it's pressed into their physical environment as well. And again, look, starting an exercise program when you're 45 obviously isn't as good as if you're starting it at 20 or 16, but it's not worthless either. I mean, plenty of people have been ill at health till they're 40, and then they get on a regimen, they have a scare or something, or they just feel like that's it. I'm going to get, I'm going to lose some weight. I'm going to, start going to the gym or whatever. I'm going to exercise. I'm going to get better shape. I'm going to eat better. I'm going to sleep better. Uh, and it's going to produce a different physicality where I can withstand more and move more confidently in this environment. And that will help not just me, but my family and the people around me. So, energetics are nothing more than that as well, right? There's no difference really. I mean, we have these high ideals that, doing anything once a week is enough to kind of keep your toe in the door. And it's like, Uh, no, sorry, not really. It's it's not adequate, and it's not adequate for the stressors that we have in this day and age. So you need to set up a practice that you can maintain, that you can build into and maintain over time, and get better and better at it. And you'll see, if it's a good system, you'll see the results relatively quickly. And that should encourage you to go further.
At one point we talked about, or I was encouraging you to do a course on energetic protection because
Mm-hmm.
we thought that that would be, I thought that it would be popular, that there would be a lot of people that would want that or be interested in learning about that because um, they feel that they're in that situation or they don't want to find themselves in that situation or um, but it was not something that you wanted to do. Can you talk about why?
In my experience and the experience of most of my colleagues, 90%, if not higher than that, is generated by self. I'm not saying that they're not being accosted, but they're being accosted by their thought patterns, their own thought patterns, their own um, expressions of their lack of understanding or the need to blame bad physical experiences or mental experiences on something other than themselves,
What
which
do
is
you mean?
just not the case for the
What do you
most
mean by their own lack of understanding? Lack of understanding of what?
of these, basic principles that.
And what basic principle are they not understanding if they perceive something coming from the outside and you're saying 90% of the time people are generating the negative effects that they're perceiving in their environment from themselves, they're self-generating it
Right.
by their own thought patterns or their own like what else could be generating that effect for them that they would perceive it as being these people are attacking me or these people are holding me back or they don't want me to succeed or whatever it is or get better or
Right, right. Yeah, so just remember, I mean, this is where the energetics of it, if you want, or the mental part is linked very closely with the physical part. So the physical hardwiring of the brain, we are hardwired mentally for threat assessment. It's the only reason that our species is still here compared to others that have gone, right? We're very highly motivated toward threat assessment. When you visually see something or perceive something, your brain in a millisecond is trying to decide obstacle or tool to get me closer to what I want. Obstacle standing in my way or a tool that can be utilized to get me what I want. That's before any conscious apprehension of what's actually in front of you. That's how fast it works. This is hardwired or coded into us, right? So then the process takes a little bit more of a thought, right? Like, is the obstacle just something that's stationary and something I need to find a way around? Is it just a problem? Or is it actively seeking my demise? That would be the next thing, right? It's like you're walking down a path, you see a wild animal in front of you, or even a dog, right? You both stop and you observe each other. Now, I'm thinking, can I go around this? Or is it a cute dog and I can just, pet it and get a smile on my face, and continue walking on, right? So there's my initial threat assessment. Depending on what happens next, right? Instead of it just being an obstacle, it's either wagging its tail and brandishing itself, maybe even being skittish around me, maybe turning and running or whatever. And you can evaluate that one way, all the way to baring its teeth and approaching me in a very aggressive manner. All of those steps, have, you have to make different decisions based on all of those things, right? That's why even people that have pets, if somebody new goes toward the pet, you're not extending your hand like this, right? You're extending your hand like this, so it can come the rest of the way and sniff your hand if it looks like it might be friendly or whatever. I mean, you're not extending your hand like this to something that's baring its teeth and growling, right? And ears and hackles up, and like all those things that are clear signs that it does not want to have this interaction with you, or you look like food. So,
So how does this relate to generating negative effects for yourself from
well,
your
as soon as as soon as you have something negative that you're labeling as negative happen in your life, you're looking to find out, is it a mistake that I made, or is it something that's coming from the outside that's trying to thwart me in one way or another, right? Because we're hardwired for threat assessment. Doesn't matter if it's coming from your thought process or not, right? So it's far more likely that people are going to think, because of that wiring, that it's something that's coming from the outside, not from the inside. And as soon as you have that thought, now confirmation bias plays into it in a way that everything sort of seems to align, that is confirming that it's something from the outside trying to, take you out in one way or another. So anytime I have a conversation with somebody, when they tell me this, one of my first questions that very few people can answer adequately is, why would somebody want to do that?
why would somebody want to attack
Take
you
you out? Why
or
would
keep
somebody
you
want to
from
accost you?
yeah.
What would be the reason for that? Because nothing just happens. There's always a reason, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, you know, were you in the wrong place at the wrong time? Were you, like, go through the list. I mean, just think of things that have happened to you. And, most times, if we're honest with ourselves, 98% of the time it's because we misstepped, not because something was actively seeking our demise. And what would it be doing that for, especially on an energetic level? I mean, this is where most people, um, this is the single incident that I could say the majority, the response that is most consistent, and at the same time is equally most erroneous, is that because they're, working for the light, or some, other,
The person that's being accosted is working for
yeah,
yeah.
that they're so good that something bad is trying to take them out. And, and I have all I can do from the beginning, but now even more, because it's so consistent now, it's like I have all I can do to not burst out laughing. Because, if you were that good with the light, or you were that kind of holy or sacred or whatever you want to call it, or saintly, or God knows what, put something in there, it's like you wouldn't have this problem. you know And it's another one of those warped kind of messianic ideas, right? It's very, very common. You would literally be surprised at how many times that is offered as a as a why it's happening. Um, the ones that I think I take a little bit more seriously are the ones that are, you know, people that have gotten involved in other traditions that are a little bit more aggressive or cultish or that type of thing, that they're trying to exert, control. They're trying to leave, the people are trying to leave, and then this group is trying to exert control to keep them in place or keep them there or whatever it is, right? That's definitely a thing. So, but it's very few, very few people are in that category. Um, but those, that's a little bit different. But again, there's not, by percentages, there aren't that many people that are involved in that stuff, right? So, and then also, um, the other equation of that, the other part of the equation is that, you have to have the aggressors have the skill to do it. And again, extremely rare, really rare. I mean,
Why is that so rare?
for the same reason it's rare that people can work this stuff in a positive direction. It takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of training. And you have to be congruent with the idea, in this case, that you're harming people or exerting your control over somebody. That if you don't grow up in a culture where that's the case, or you don't have literally a psychosis in that direction, meaning like, a sociopath, where your will is the only will that's of any concern, nothing else matters, right? um they're just, that makes that pool of people very, very small.
Right.
Right.
It's like you were saying before, you're saying like 2% of people are willing to even do what it takes to develop skills like that. And 2% of those people are even good enough to be effective. And you're
Correct.
saying like in general, energetic work like that is challenging, and it requires a lot of, like, anybody who's tried to manifest or change anything about their life for the positive, for the better, they know, they have some reference point for the ins and outs of like how that goes and how it works and how easy or difficult it is, or how much energy or focus or attention they have to give something or some aspect of their
Time.
life, time to get it to move. So then if you extrapolate and say like, well, it's just as difficult to produce a negative effect for someone else that it is to produce a positive effect for yourself. That's the analogy that you're making, or that's what you're saying. It's the same. So what what who is the person that's developed themselves in that way, that has the skill and the motivation and the time and the energy to spend their time and energy producing this negative effect for someone else, right? Like, who is that person? What are they? What's their motivation?
Correct.
And it's funny because like I don't want to drag things too like off topic, because I feel like there are some other things to address there about like helping yourself or building yourself up, or even understanding how we produce negative effects for ourselves. But it does make me think to some degree about like conspiracy theories, and even how our like Kira and I, we put on last night. I was curious about it. It was this documentary somebody had made about the uh, like attack or whatever on the Capitol,
Mm.
you know, and it was, and the documentary like covered this one. He's kind of a comedian documentary, so it's kind of in jest, but it was all his raw footage and interviews of people like on the street who were rioting or protesting or whatever. And he interviewed just tons of people, and we turned it off after like, I don't know, 15 minutes or 20 minutes or something, because we were just like, oh my God, this is, we cannot handle this. So it was, I was just curious because I saw that the
Right.
ad for it a bunch of times, and I was like, I wonder what this is like, you know.
Right. Yeah.
and and um and the amazing thing, not the amazing thing, but just maybe the instructive thing was just to see examples or extreme cases of people becoming extremely angry and chaotic because they felt that their lives or their situation was not in their control, but in the control of somebody, these other people or whatever that basically are evil or have, these horrible intentions for humanity, and they were saying, and those people were thinking, oh, it's, you know, Trump is the worst or Biden is the worst or whatever. And it's just like, the polarity and the intensity of that. But at the core of it, it was like, um, you know, basically these external things are responsible for, my well-being. Those are the things that are going to have the biggest impact on my existence. And it's not going the way that I think it should. And I can, the only thing I can perceive that I can do to change it is like basically going into the street and like screaming at a building or burning something down or, whatever.
Whatever. Yeah.
Um, so, um,
And that's a perfect example of like, what we used to call mob mentality. Now we call group psychosis, right? We keep elevating the terms, right?
mm,
So, but that's how like even a charismatic speaker can get a rabble,
right.
a mob
But,
going, just by saying the right things at the right time and understanding the energetics of the crowd and ramping them up and
but it
or
also,
calming them down as well, right?
but it also speaks to, in some ways, the core, I think, of what we do, right? Which again comes back to that idea of like what you're saying, because like rioting in the street is like the ultimate and a peak example of force versus force, right?
Yep.
Um, but like, how do you, what, what's the starting point of withdrawing your life energy being directed as force at at an outside influence or outside influences, and bringing that back within yourself um to perceive and actualize, you know uh power to change your life, right? Or power to make things better around you.
Right. Instead of going, instead of feeling like you're a victim, you know, manifesting yourself as thriving instead of that, growing, right? Starting from yourself and working out instead of starting from the outside, working to gather up, all these others and with a concerted effort, vanquishing the negative. I mean, look, history shows that that's just a constant thing, right? It's like people have, gotten to the point of revolution and those types of scenarios, small or big, successful or crushed, forever, right? And so, that, uh, you know, dynasties or empires or whatever, thrive for a certain amount of time until they get so corrupt that they collapse in on themselves. Um, and the Taoists have a really good principle called the principle of reversion, right? Meaning what's on the bottom goes to the top, what's on the top goes to the bottom. And this is just a cycle. It's a natural cycle, right? So, um, and we see that represented in societies over and over again, right? It's just that now we're seeing the time from the beginning of these societies or empires, um, to the end of them, shortening in duration, right? Everything from the Egyptians to now, right? It's like it seems almost like it's exponential,
The
right?
cycle of growth and
Of their
collapse.
growth and decline,
Yeah.
right? So, and the only thing I can think of in that way, it's like, look, people don't, you know, would there have would there have been a French Revolution? I mean, it's speculation, right? But would there have been a French Revolution if, uh, you know, people were allowed a certain amount of freedom to grow, right? To be able to feed their families adequately, to feel like they were able to, um, move forward, in some way, to be, um, to make their life better in some way. Um, Probably not. To not starve. I mean, it's like, you there's there, how did a bunch of peasants with pitchforks, you know, um, you know, dismantle a standing military and more money than God, right? It's like giant, castles and, like, it's just overwhelming numbers. Well, because, at the heart of it, everybody has their breaking point, right? It's like, and, in that case, it's like you can take the most peaceful person and, you know, if you put enough stress on them, you can turn them into, somebody who's willing to do violence, right? It's like, would the pain of dying in a revolution be worse than watching my children slowly starve to death? For most people, no, it wouldn't be. And that's how these things, sort of go, right? So, you know, my thing is, or our thing is more like, just understand the principles of these things, that as above, so below. What in your life represents, if your life was an empire, how would you run it? What would you do? Would you send your children out into the workforce, if you could, and like collect all the things, beat them into submission, collect all the stuff that they, all the money that they made, no matter how little, and just gave them enough sustenance to, get by, or, whatever, and make your own life palatial and better, but they get nothing out of that, just a roof over their head and a bare amount of food to survive. You don't think that they're going to retaliate? People retaliate for a lot less than that, right? So, or is it that, in an ideal situation, knowing the strength of those numbers, and that, that that everybody's working toward the same goal, and that goal ends up building the whole family stronger and stronger, right? So, um, it's the same thing. It's again, am I a victim, or am I the responsible? Am I responsible for myself? And of course that takes a couple of different, it's the ability to take responsibility for your actions and for what's going on with you, understanding it to the best of your ability, even if you have to go to your friends and say, what do you think about this? You know, and get an outside opinion. If you were in my situation, what would you do? I mean, that's something that we just, because we don't live in small communities anymore, we don't always have, we don't always do that, We don't even have, a lot of times we don't have friends that we can even do that with, right? It's like everybody's embarrassed to think they have a problem, like nobody else has problems. So are you kidding me? Everybody's got problems. It's like, and you might get a perspective. I can't tell you how many times I have a very small group of what I would consider close friends, right? And, what do I mean by that? To me, my close friends are the people that don't just support me when I'm doing well, but they tell me before I make a bad mistake, that they think going to make a bad mistake. They don't care about my feelings about that, or that I'm going to be upset with them or whatever. It's like they literally care more about me even than they care about our friendship. And I serve the same role for them. If I see they're going to F up, or that they're doing something that is going to really impact their life in a negative way, at least in my view, I bring it to them, without regard. I mean, like, and here's the weird thing. I've never had, on either side, I've never had a friend in that, cohort of friends. I've never had one say, I don't want to be friends with you anymore or diss me for doing that. Um, uh, and I've never done that to any of them. It's sort of like that's the safety measure of it, right? It's like, I want you, you establish that at some point in the relationship and say, I want you to tell me if you see me going off the rails in some way. If I'm drinking too much, if I'm overindulging in things too much, if I'm, um, um, you know, uh, doing things that will ruin my relationships or whatever. Like I just, I'm out of control, or it looks like I'm moving in that direction, or I'm going to do something that goes against my better nature, right? They'll 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 step up and do that. And so without and give me a chance to rebut that as well, right? And say, like, here's how I see it, this is what's going on. And we have this conversation, right? And sometimes it can be a little heated, but it's always within the realm of, like, you get to say whatever you want to say, and I get to rebut that or think about it. And there have been numbers of times when it's like, oh, I never really thought about it that way. It's like it it makes our friendship better because it saved me from falling into a pit that I maybe wouldn't be able to recover from. And so there isn't anything more valuable than that. At its core, I mean, maybe people don't know this, but at its core, a lot of these societies, these spiritual societies, were supposed to be that. I mean, that's why they called them fraternities, right? They were brothers. Would you let your brother suffer? Would you let him walk into a bear trap if you could see it but he couldn't? you know and then if you give him the warning and he walks into it anyway, do you try to help him recover from that, or do you dismiss him, or what do you do, right? It was like, you are your brother's keeper. I mean, that was sort of one of the core tenets of any of these fraternities at their best, right? At their core of what they were supposed to be. It's somewhat lost these days. Everybody's sort of like hands off. Oh, it's okay, do whatever you want to do. I'm going to turn a blind eye or whatever it is. But that's not helping out a friend. You're watching them walk into their own demise in one way or another. I mean, that's not friendship, right? So I know we're getting a little off track, but it's like, it's good to see a broader picture of all of this, I think, and to understand it on that level, right? It's like, somebody has to have the ability to harm you. If you're thinking something's coming from the outside, they have to not just have the ability, they have to have, you know, uh, the desire to do it. They have to have a reason for doing it, right? Because it takes energy from them as well, right? To do this, they have to spend time and effort and, risk to do these things, right? Um, And, you know, it's not that they're, the potential for them to come out of it unscathed is not, um, it's not zero. So, you know, it's, it, there's that risk assessment as well for them.
Right. Because again, like I think not just the risk for somebody attacking somebody else from the perspective of like, well, someone might attack you back if you're doing
Right.
that attacking, right? So you might find yourself in a confrontation that might not go so well for you, right? You might get
Yep.
it over your head or whatever. Um, but not only that, I think coming back to, at least for me, coming back to the idea of congruency, right? Because I think when I think about somebody uh, doing any doing some kind of energy work to harm or limit another person intentionally, for me personally, and it just might be my personality, but I I don't I can't at this point I can't even imagine like being congruent with that, you know, like
Yep.
I would have to I would have to feel like that I was being or someone I cared about was being like severely, attacked by that person to actually
Well,
be like, well,
then
I
you,
have to step in and do something from a defensive standpoint, right?
and so then, you have thought about it to some
Well, I
extent.
just thought about it now while I was saying it because I was like,
I
because
was, because I was just gonna be like friendly mentor chastising you and saying, then you got some work to do
right.
because
Well,
you
I just
need to
never,
plumb the depths of that to
yeah,
find out where that is in you, because it's in all of us.
right.
What would be the thing? You could be the most passive critter on the earth, right? It's like even a mouse will attack something if it has no, if it's backed into a corner, right? It's like,
Yeah, I guess it's the hard part for me wasn't I think, or the thing that was like in my head, a stumbling block was like the congruency part, right?
yeah,
But I guess that is the issue. It's like at some point, at some level of experience or scenario or whatever, everybody can find themselves in a position where they're congruent with doing something that they would otherwise think as being like distasteful or awful or
sure.
whatever, because like it's like if this but if the situation was such that XYZ, I would be congruent with
Doing whatever he
taking,
needs to do to
right,
survive.
yeah, right, and
Right.
it's like, and I would be able to like dissipate that or let that go because it's like, well, I had no other options, like that doesn't,
Yeah.
that
Or
was
the
it.
other option was, let's not even do those absolutes, right? Let's say you have other options. Always. There's
Yeah,
always another option, but it has, a far it's farther down the spectrum than the option you're choosing as far as the end result being good for you, right? Because there are people that will just lay down and die, right? They're very few, but they're there, right? Or that whatever the potential is for harm to themselves or others isn't great enough for them to rise to the challenge in however little challenge they could put up, right? It's better just to succumb, you know. But again, they're in an extreme minority because we're hardwired for it, right? It's like we want to survive, we want to live,
well, I
you
guess
know.
that was, well, I don't want to miss the point though too, that like the chances of somebody like doing that negative work against somebody else, that they're not just risking getting, you know, scathed, or the risk is not just, the risk isn't just something might happen to me from somebody else recognizing what I'm doing and attacking me back or something like that. There's also the internal risk, right? Of like,
Far greater.
I might not, I might find that I'm not actually congruent with this. And I might not have a way, or I might not know how to resolve this before it starts to produce negative effects for me in my life.
Correct.
Right. And that, and coming back to what you were saying before is like that's 90% of the time that's what you see happening with people that approach you to like assess their situation or reach out for some kind of energetic protection or help, is that like the person that feels they're being accosted is actually producing those negative effects in their life from the inside out, right?
Correct.
Because
And
like
here's the energetic, you know, mm, here's the thing that everybody should ask themselves, you know, when they think about these things, right? Just in general, like you don't have to be, you know, you don't even have to be a spiritual person. You know, it's like literally like just ask yourself, what's it easier to focus on? Something great or something negative? If you say great, you're lying. We're hardwired for threat assessment. It's so much easier to, you know, and so much more difficult to deflect your thoughts away from a negative outcome or something, you know, that's you're pinning a negative label on, you know, than it is to keep your mind focused on something positive. Otherwise, everybody would do law of attraction, right? If all it was like, oh, I can keep this perfect image of me, with the curly mustache and the top hat and the cane, and I'm walking down the boardwalk, and I win Monopoly all the time in real life. It's like I own the hotels and the railroads and everything else.
so are you suggesting that like uh, that a percentage, some percentage of the work involved in anything law of attraction oriented is whatever technique or practice that you have to train yourself to focus on the positive and dissipate your
Dissipate
instinctive
the negative first.
reactionary attention on the negative.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why the burning meditation is so foundational. You know, it's the stress and mental fatigue represents what? You know,
The stress and
good
mental
things
fatigue that
don't
you,
bring stress.
right, the stress and mental, because in the practice you're burning off,
Yeah.
this
A
black material that comes
representation
out of
of
you.
that stress and mental fatigue, which has
Yeah.
an impact on you.
Yeah.
Again, lots of little nuances there, but basically that's what it is. So you're burning off that, you know, stress that produces anxiety, right? Fatigue that represents, actual physical fatigue or mental fatigue from, from things that are overwhelming you in physical reality, whether it be a health or relationship or success type things, right? I mean, it's like, when we start looking at these things and listing them, I'm sure people can, list even more than I'm doing. I'm just like, we don't have enough time to list all the shit that goes on, right? It's like, look, when most, like the vast majority of divorces happen because of financial stress. Like your financial stress is ruining your relationship. I'm sure there are other things. I'm not saying it's just that one thing, but it's like these are the numbers. It's just objective stats, right? It's like this is the thing. It's like, so, you know, can you kill two birds with one stone? I think you might be able to. If you, let's say you're burning off the stress and mental fatigue of that financial stress, well, then you're not projecting that onto your partner. And if they're doing it, they're not projecting it on you. You have enough energy because you've burned off fatigue, from being overwhelmed with things and having a logical conversation. Do you know how many times my wife and I have talked about selling the house, or um, all numbers of things, right? Because, and I would, in the beginning, I just didn't even want to think about it, right? I always had other ways of sort of, you know, dealing with that or whatever, in good times, bad times, whatever. Obviously in good times it doesn't matter, but in bad times, tight times, you'd be like, oh, maybe we should, sell that. And I'd be like, oh, that's like so abhorrent to me. And at the same time, it's like, but you know what? When we actually had real conversations about that, it lifted the stress of it. Like everything should be on the table, not just selective things that seem okay to you or that you're willing to do, right? It's like everything should be on the table so that you can look at things objectively, um, and uh, and decide what's the best course of action, you know? And, there's some relief about getting everything out there and saying, like, here's the reality of the situation. And, you know, let's make plans around all of these things. Let's look at them objectively, with as little emotion as possible, and see what, if we follow through with any of these things or all of them, what would be the end result, right? It takes a huge amount of stress off the table, right? Because you're just looking at it as an exercise. And even though you don't have any intention of doing that, right? But you're looking at it objectively, that you might do that, you could do that if that was an option. It already relieves the stress of the situation and lets things flow again, right? But if you're constantly resisting those certain options, right? You're constantly resisting them. You're putting more force into those negative things, which only builds them up even stronger and depletes you in the process. So now you can't even think clearly. Instead of having a multitude of options, you have two or three that you're willing to do. It really restricts you. And again, you know, throwing energy toward the resistance of any option is depleting you in some ways. I'm not saying you have to take those. Obviously, we didn't take those, but by objectively putting them on the table as something that can be done, it removed the stress of the situation, and energy was able to flow into the things that we wanted instead. So it's just all of these things, and it becomes more clear. Those things become more clear the more that you have something that will, a technique that will dissipate that stress, that will burn it off, and, represented, in a way that has the most effect for you. You'll feel it mentally. You'll be more relaxed. Physically, you'll have more energy, right? It's easier to smile. It's easier to, go through your day a little more lighthearted, right? It's not so, it doesn't feel like there's an axe hanging over your neck all the time. So that alone will get you to, not just think more clearly, but maneuver more clearly as well, right? So it's such an important thing. And the same thing goes with, feeling like you're being attacked from the outside, right? Most people find, if they'll do these practices and a few others, that it's not really being generated from the outside. It's something was, you know, um, some seed was planted in your mind, and you're growing that plant into something that will eventually devour you. Hate to make the reference to the, cordyceps or whatever on, The Last of Us, but Same kind
Maybe
of
that's a
deal.
good analogy, you know.
Well, it is.
I mean, you might have to spell it out though, if
It's
you,
parasitic, right?
because
It
in
only devours you.
so in The
That's the
Last of
thing.
Us, yeah, basically it's a zombie show, right? But the zombies are caused not by a virus or whatever causes zombies in other zombie movies, but the zombies are created by a cordyceps mushroom that
Mutated.
evolves, mutates to do what it does to ants and other insects to humans, which is basically take over their mind and cause them to infect others of their of their species
Right.
by going toward the hive or whatever and spreading their spores and all that kind of stuff. So basically, it's like, mushroom zombies. Um,
all
but
my all my love for mushrooms, it's like, yeah, it's a little scary. But still,
yeah,
but the concept was brilliant.
yeah,
But
but
that's true. It's
so
true.
so um so how are you making an analogy for people having internal things that going on that they unconsciously feed with energy that ends up, what's your why did you make that reference? And
Well, because and this might be a little bit too much, but try to keep me on track, Dustin. That's your job, right? It's
working
like,
on it.
you know, knowing some decent amount about, growing mushrooms and things of that nature, right? It's like, um, you need a good substrate, right? And not only a good substrate, meaning the proper amounts of nutrients and things that they can grow in. If we're going to continue with the mushroom thing, I think it's an appropriate one, but it's got to be sterile or close to that, right? Because
So basically, like, if you're starting to make this analogy, like you like like I want it to be like, if you're gonna do it, like I want it to come across as being clear. So like in this analogy of, mushrooms growing, like the substrate, you need some kind of nutritive sterile substrate. In your analogy of people creating negative effects for themselves from their own mind and from their subconscious that gets projected into their world, what's the substrate?
the substrate is going to be, how it's a difficult one, right? Like it's how clear your energetic field is, basically, you know, because we're talking that, your energy being projected in, in different ways, in different formats, and different ways that you're thinking about it, different constructs will have the ability to um, form your, you know, exterior environment to some degree. So
I mean,
um,
that's the core idea.
that's the core idea, right? So, but if you have, like if I take a substrate that hasn't been purified, hasn't been, maybe it's a good nutrient base, right? But I haven't sterilized it from everything that competes with it. Let's say, there's just as many, let's say, deleterious mold spores in the substrate as, the medicinal, the best gourmet mushrooms that I could grow, right? So if I don't take care of those to some degree, to the majority of the degree, now they're competing, right? And again, we know that the negative parts, we call them negative, right? It's just they're just organisms that are trying to grow, right? I mean, it's not like they're inherently nasty, right? It's not like they're evil. Mold isn't evil, right? It doesn't have a will to, to to take over. It's just trying to grow, right? So it's like, but we know they're so quick about doing that. They kind of can spread so easily that, before your gourmet mushrooms come up that are, consumable for you and make your life better, make you healthier, the mold is going to overtake it, right? most times, and going to taint them or not let them even grow, right? Because they'll be competing and they're going to overwhelm it. And so,
Because you'll be using because the gourmet mushrooms that you want would be using all their energy to direct it into their immune system to try and fight the mold instead of being able to produce fruiting bodies that you can eat.
correct, correct. And so, and of course, those fruiting bodies are great as food for the mold too, right? So even they get consumed if there's enough mass of that mold spore to kind of overwhelm them, right? So
So basically, you're drawing an analogy, not so much with this kind of zombie
yeah,
thing with
no,
The Last of Us, but more so with like your mind being a sterile or your mind being a substrate on which anything can grow. And it
correct,
can grow positive things like gourmet mushrooms for you, or it can grow mold for you. And if you got too much mold growing in the substrate of your mind, then you basically you know you have a war going on that you can't overcome to produce the fruit that you need to feed yourself.
right, exactly, exactly. So it just, when we think of those, you know, I had this one teacher that was just great about things like that. And I try to utilize it. I'm not always great with it, but I do try to utilize it on a regular basis. And he would say, anytime you get confused about, something philosophical or energetic or right, even in a martial way, he'd say, give it a as simple a physical analogy as possible, and it will make things more clear for you. And I always thought that was just a brilliant way of looking at these things, because again, it falls in line with as above, so below.
Yeah,
That there's nothing different between the energetic and the physical, right? It's
it is
just a
funny.
different consolidation of that. It's a different density of the same stuff. So there really isn't any difference. And so because we live and move and have our being in this sort of physical environment, we have perfect vessels to move around in this stuff in, right? It's like it's so much easier for us to look at those physical analogies and kind of make sense of it, and then look at it, okay, how does that compare to this energetic idea or this philosophical idea or whatever, right?
It's
So
funny because even in the sterilizing of a substrate for growing mushrooms, it's like you're using heat and pressure to do
that's
it,
right,
right? And then that's exactly the same as the
the
burning
tumo or
meditation.
burning meditation, yeah, exactly. Or there are other ones that are like that from different traditions, but they all seem to have some kind of you know um you know type of burning, type of
Well,
purification rituals or whatever you want
even
to
if
call
it's
it.
not burning, it's like some kind of connection, um, an elemental connection, right?
That's right. And different levels for different things, right? I mean, we have those as well. So it's just that most mm, most traditions that I know of, would consider fire to be the most purifying of the elements. So, burning something is transitioning it into, the most rarefied energetic form. So, yeah. So it's just one of those things where they've seen these, using again that physical mentality or physical analogy, you know, um, around that, you know, to make sense of that same idea in an energetic or spiritual way. So
So if someone felt like they were being accosted, if they were perceiving the situation in that way, would you advise them to basically do burning meditation? And if so, how would that help to bring clarity or resolution, or what would that do? How would that affect them? How would that help?
well, it changes you mentally and physically, right? It gives you some relief. If you're under duress, any relief feels good, right? So um and it stops at least the rate of accumulation of more of the same, right? So I'm going to keep burning this and burning it and burning it until I get it down to a level where, let's say, I start to perceive things differently, right? I start to look at things differently. It doesn't seem to be as weighty as it used to be. It doesn't seem to be the incidence of perceived attacks seem to be less in amplitude and less in, frequency. So um, you're kind of wearing it down, right? So and again, this clears your mind, right? So that you can think about things, from a different angle, from a different perspective, and you can explore them a little bit more. And anything that you would then utilize, to help bolster yourself, besides just burning the stress and fatigue away, anything that you would then, you know, let's say, uh, invoke within you, you know, would be able to. That's the new seed that you would be planting and that you would be growing, right? So you're taking down the bad or the perceived bad, at least stress and fatigue, and then you're building up, a cleaner energetic field, so that that's going to make that seed of positivity, or whatever, in whatever form, you want to plant it, um, be able to grow and, overcome the situation, right? So that's the thing, because, and we know this again from, you know, any kind of growing, right? It's like, once the plant, the good plant or whatever, is well established, it takes a lot to take it down,
Mm.
right? It takes a lot to take that down. So um you're gonna end up with which, reversing the whole thing and taking, becoming stronger, and it becomes almost an energetic hormesis, right? Where the stress of the situation has produced a much stronger effect in you for the positive, right? You've built up your energetic muscles to overcome what's going on, and then you move forward in that new way, right? Just like anybody who would take on, physical exercise, better sleep, better diet, right? You're going to be able to move forward on your, success, your relationship, your health, in a much more positive light, right? Everything you do is going to have much more effect, and, produce more of the same for you. We're just turning the momentum in the other direction, right? So this is one of the true benefits of doing these practices. Whether you feel you're being attacked or not, right? Because again, those people that feel they're being attacked they're a very tiny percentage of the people that, do any of this work. And even fewer of them are actually being accosted, from an outside source, right? So um and so the burning, and there are other nuances that are probably just too pedantic to get into at this point, with other attributes of the burning meditation and how that, helps to deplete those things, eventually eradicate them,
Deplete
so
what things?
any kind of negative thing that you think is being done to you,
If
in an
yeah,
energetic way.
even if you were in that situation and you were doing burning, it would help to
Oh yeah.
eradicate that,
Yep. It would.
but not probably in a single meditation.
Oh no, definitely not. Definitely not. We don't want to I don't want to overpromise any. That would be, I've never seen it happen. That would be an extreme that I've not witnessed. Where a single burning meditation would, eradicate everybody's, bad luck or whatever it is, so, cursed, whatever. No. Mm-mm. No. But you have the tool now. It's like, and for the people that think they can't do that, it's like, well, then then what's being done to you can't be that bad, right? Because people will do a lot of, you know, they'll do a lot of negative things, painful things for themselves, whether mental or physical, to, get out of a worse situation. So,
Right.
I mean, that's the truth of it, right? So when anybody
But
tells me, I give them these things to do, and they're like, "Oh, I couldn't do it because this isn't." Well, then you're not suffering that much, because there's always, you have the strength, you have the tools now, you have the strength. I can't swing the fucking hammer for you. It's like you need to do this, and I know you're tired, but start off with 20 minutes, start off with 10 minutes. Jesus, do anything. Just the act of doing for yourself will already start to turn the momentum in your positive direction. The ability to want to do it and to actually take a step in that direction already changes the tide to some degree, right? And then it's just building on it. It literally could be that much. I mean, I understand if you're a single mom, you got 3 kids, you're working 2 jobs, whatever, you're exhausted all the time. It's like you don't have an hour to do burning meditation. It's like I get that. I do. I've had plenty of people like that. So do 10 minutes. Do 10 minutes before you go to bed. Guarantee you'll even sleep better. It's like, any action taken on your own behalf is so much stronger than anything anybody else can do for you. So it's
yeah,
the start of it, all of that, right?
yeah, yeah.
Because that says, what is it about that? Because it sounds dumb, right? I mean, on a physical level, it sounds ridiculous, like, um, so somebody contracts me to do that for them.
Do
That's
the
one thing.
protection work for
How
them.
could that, yeah, how could that be, how could them doing 10 minutes, every other day be, give them, a push in that direction compared to, somebody else doing it, that has experience and knows what they're doing. So, but that act alone is, again, that same teacher would say anything that you do for yourself is 10 times stronger than something somebody else can do for you. Just being, having the ability and putting the effort in to do that first initial 10 minutes or whatever it is equivalent to the act of saying, no, I'm not going to roll over. I'm not going to die here. It's like, I'm going to stand up and do what I can. I know it's small. I know it's just a grain of sand, but grains of sand can start an avalanche over time. They build up too, right? Just that act of saying no turns the tide. So, and it's not in an aggressive fighting way, although if you need that to start, then that's fine. But it's not you know, I mean, I say this all the time, it's not a pissing contest, it's not like you're fighting against somebody else. You're literally, bringing yourself, making yourself unassailable. That's what it is. You're deflecting. You're not aggressively attacking. You're deflecting what, is perceived to be an attack. And and establishing that deflection establishes, an inroad to building yourself up to the point where you're unassailable. It takes time, but just, it's literally that initial act that's the big push, right? Anybody that does that, they're well on their way to, kind of extracting themselves from that situation.
Cool. Cool. All right. Good. Yeah, I'm glad we kind of talk that out because I know that if it's something that we converse about publicly to any degree, there's there's going to be people that are going to reach out and ask for help or be looking for something to do, um, that may feel they're in that situation. So I feel like it's good to just have something to refer them to that might be, um, at least a starting point, just because, again, your schedule's really full. So, um, the amount of actual people that you can, work with in that capacity is very limited. So, um, so, uh, I just makes me feel better knowing that your perspective on these things and giving people something to do like that actually can really help them and kind of, shift their perspective from the inside out, not just like here's a different way to perceive this, which I think may be helpful and contained in this conversation, but also like doing a practice that will clear you, but also in that clearing, give you a different perspective and a different perception of yourself and your circumstances. Like that's one of those things that's so hard to communicate about, the practice is like, you a lot of the time, we put a lot of emphasis on describing the practice and how it works, what's the energetic theory, you know, behind it, on and on and on, and a lot of the nuances of like how to maximize its effectiveness in practice. But the real gems are like when you do it and then that that insight comes or that different perspective comes that's completely unique to you and your situation that like maybe wasn't there before or whatever. um it's
Yeah,
like,
because it comes from the experience of it, not just the understanding of the information of how to do it.
right.
The techniques are just like any techniques, right? It's like I was talking the other, when we were talking the other day about me changing the battery in the car or whatever. And I was just like out of my mind with that. And that, you know, how do you get,
Yeah, because
a
the
10
car
inch
that you
battery
have,
out of a 3-inch space?
yeah,
It's
you
like, oh
happen to
my
have a
God, I got
car
to
that
take all
has
these
like
things apart, right? It's
an
the experience of doing
yeah,
it piece by piece that gives you, the ability to sort of work your way through it. But I had to have, you know, I had to see a representation of that to show me where to start with that. But the information alone wasn't enough. It doesn't replace the experience of me doing it.
right.
And in the experience of doing it, it made it, every time I went through a certain step and I did it, I was like, oh, I could be a little more, I was a little more relieved, right? Because
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm always expecting like, oh, they're going to miss a step and I'm going to be stuck in this place where I've got all these pieces all over the place and I don't even know how to put it back together. And I've gotten to a place where there's, literally a bind that I can't get out of that they
Right,
forgot to mention. How do you do this part? Right. And so the technique, the explanation of the technique, the understanding of the information has the most minimal aspect on the experience itself, right? The doing of that. You want to feel the end result of doing it. That's the whole thing, right? It's like it's so important to, separate those things out, like go through the process, understand it to the best of your ability. It wasn't like, in the temple, they would say, you have to memorize this completely before you can even attempt it. It's like, no, it was like somebody that was more advanced, rattled off the series of things that you were supposed to do. And you tried to remember as many of those steps as you could each time that you did it. And you got farther and farther until you memorized the sequence. So then it was just the flow. You were completely in the experience. You didn't have to think, oh, okay, I did this part. Now what's the next part? It was like, no, it's just like you just know what to do, right? It's like, but it's again, these things are exactly the same as anything that we do here in physicality, right? It's like we have to stop
Mm.
thinking that there's two sets of rules,
Right.
right? It's the same damn thing, and if we can do that, um, you know, it's already such a different way of, of approaching these things and being involved in them and checking them out, right? Um, good systems produce good results. Good training produces good results. Bad training, bad results, right? So, and we need to be, uh, uh, we want the truth more than we want to be right. So it's like we need to evaluate those things for ourselves, um, based on what kind of result do I want, and can the person that's instructing me tell me clearly, how in their experience, how many things you're going to need to do to achieve that, right? It's like, again, sometimes it's like opening a can of worms, right? It's like I'm giving a literally such a basic format of what to do for yourself in these situations that will achieve. If you only do this, if you never hear from me or anybody else again, if you only do this, this will have some benefit for you, that you can actually experience, right? If you're able to keep up with it, if you're able to do it to the extent where it's not accosting you anymore, you know um and and that's the thing. It's like it's so important for people to understand that they can stand against almost anything, if they just start, if they just do what they can do. And somebody, if they get some information that says this will help you, try it out, you know um and every tradition has their ways of doing those
Yeah.
things.
I think that's probably
I just take the approach. I was very fortunate to I've known many of these traditions, and the ones that really work the best, is the stuff that I'm giving people, that we're offering people, right? It's like, here's what I found works most of the time if you apply yourself in this way. It's like,
right.
you know and
Yeah.
that's it.
I think that last point you made is really valuable. Just that people, like you said, people can overcome almost anything if they, have a technique that they can utilize for themselves to build themselves up in that way. Um, then you actually believe that that's the case.
There's no doubt in my mind. The potential of people is incredible. We haven't scratched the damn surface. It's like, I mean, that's what keeps me going every day. It's like the potential to explore, you know, uh, deeper aspects of myself and my environment and the cosmos at large. These are, that's where I get my sustenance from. That's what I get my, entertainment and joy, and um, just every aspect of my being is just immersed in that. So, and that from that point of myself, that expands out to everyone else that's around me. So I find it's the best thing that I could offer anyone.
Cool. Thanks, man.
Yeah, no problem. It's not a great business model,
What?
making everybody independent. Making everybody self-sufficient. you know it was never meant to be that. It's like, that's what I really feel. If I can make everybody, you know uh if I could give everyone just the ability to be self-sufficient in, how to engage their spirituality, you know, then that would be fantastic for me. Fantastic. I would feel like I really accomplished something. So, and for those people that want to go further and get more nuanced approaches to that, and they're intrepid explorers like myself or whatever, then welcome. Absolutely welcome. But for those people that just want uh the basics that they can make their life more enriched, and get the help that is there for the asking. They just need to know how to ask and how to engage it in a way that's going to be, productive for them and experientially enriching, right? It's like nobody can take that shit away from you. Nobody can, they can't restrict your mind. They can't restrict your, whatever. Only we can do that to ourselves. So, you know, it's to be able to give people even a starting place for that. That's everything.